everyone. So today I want to share a bit about someone who really changed how we think about global politics, which is Woodrow Wilson, who often called the father of idealism in international relations. Woodrow Wilson's background as an academic shaped his worldview significantly before entering politics. Before entering politics, he was a professor of political science and the president of Princeton University, giving him a strong foundation in Enlightenment ideals. He believed that reason, moral progress, and education could uplift human nature and, by extension, international relations. In contrast to the realists believed that conflict is inherent and inevitable. Wilson argued that war stems from poorly designed international structures, secrecy among states, and unchecked militarism. He imagined a world where ethical diplomacy, transparency, and shared values could reduce the chances of war. His approach emphasized that states are not doomed to conflict, but are capable of cooperation if given the right moral and institutional frameworks. So the next point is the 14 points by Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson delivered a speech during World War I to outline a plan for lasting world peace. His 14 points promoted idealist values in international relations. The key principles that included is self-determination of people, which is each nation or ethnic group should have the right to govern itself. Second is open diplomacy. Secret treaties has contributed to war, and diplomacy should be transparent, and the freedom of navigation and trade, which is free seas and open trade, would reduce conflict and promote cooperation. Next is reduction of armaments, which is fewer weapons would reduce in chance of war, and general association of nations. This eventually led to League of Nations, which aiming to preserve peace through collective security. These points become the philosophical backbone of idealism, emphasizing peace through cooperation, democracy, and international law. Next, the next point is League of Nations. As part of the Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations was established as Wilson's most important idealist project. Its goals were to resolve conflicts peacefully between countries, promote collective security where nations would defend each other, and enforce international law and justice. However, the U.S. Senate refused to join the League, weakening its authority. Without U.S. support and strong enforcement powers, the League struggled to stop rising aggression in the 1930s. Despite its failure, the idea inspired the United Nations, which was created after World War II with stronger mechanisms. And the third point is legacy in idealism. Wilson's contributions become the heart of classical idealism. His legacy includes the belief that moral values like justice and democracy should guide international relations, confidence in international institutions to maintain peace, and trust in diplomacy and cooperation over war and military power. Although idealism lost popularity after World War II, it returned to modern forms like liberal internationalism, humanitarian intervention, and the responsibility to protect, which argues that the global community has a duty to protect civilians from mass violence. Next, I will talk about criticism. Critics argue Wilson was too idealistic, underestimating the role of power and national interest. His belief that international relations could be guided primarily by morality, reason, and cooperation was viewed by many as naive. Critics argue that Wilson underestimated the extent to which states act in their own self-interest, prioritizing national security, economic advantage, and power over collective norms or ethical considerations. From a realist perspective, the international system is fundamentally anarchic and competitive, making trust and sustained cooperation difficult without clear enforcement mechanisms. Next is the failure of the League of Nations to prevent World War II is often cited as evidence of the limits of idealism. Although the League was based on Wilson's visions of collective security and peaceful conflict resolution, it lacked the authority, unity, and military capacity to respond effectively to acts of aggression. Its inability to prevent the invasions by Japan, Italy in Ethiopia, and ultimately the outbreak of World War II revealed serious flaws in the idealist assumptions that international institutions alone could guarantee peace. The absence of the United States, despite being the architect of the League, further weakened its legitimacy and effectiveness. So basically, Woodrow Wilson is celebrated as the intellectual and practical pioneer of idealism in international relations. His belief that moral diplomacy, democratic governance, and international cooperation could secure lasting peace remains influential in modern liberal and institutionalist theories.
Hi, my name is Atira binti Razali and my number metric is 2023851516. Now that we have been introduced to the topic, you might be wondering, what exactly is idealism in international relation? Well, idealism actually emerged right after World War I. The world had just experienced massive destruction and people start asking, is there a better way to avoid future wars? Idealist thinkers believed there was, so they offered a more hopeful and a positive vision, one that trusted in the goodness of humanity and the possibility of the moral progress. It's deeply rooted in Enlightenment ideals. That means it values things like reason, cooperation, and the belief that both people and even entire nation can change for the better. Instead of relying on military strength or the idea that might makes right, idealism encourages us to build peace through diplomacy, share values, and also strong global institutions like the League of Nations back then or the United Nations today. So in simple terms, idealism believes that if countries are willing to talk, cooperate, and follow common rules, then maybe, just maybe, war isn't something we have to accept, but it's something that we can actually avoid. So now that we understand what idealism is, let's break down some of its key ideas. First, idealists believe that human nature is basically good, or at least capable of improvement. Think about it. What if instead of assuming that every country is just power hungry, we believe that nations can learn to act more peacefully through things like education and diplomacy? That's exactly what the idealism suggests. Second, it really emphasizes international cooperation. Why compete all the time when countries can actually work together? Through efforts like disarmament and international law. Idealists believe that peace is possible if we just choose collaboration over the conflict. Third, idealism sees global institutions like the United Nations or the League of Nations as essential. These institutions aren't just symbolic. They play a real role in preventing conflict and encouraging countries to follow international norms. Another big idea, morality matters. Idealists argue that international relations shouldn't be just about self-interest or power, but also about doing what is right. Ethics and value should guide how states behave on the global stage. And lastly, idealism believes that war isn't something natural or inevitable. It's actually a failure of diplomacy. In other words, if countries communicate better, war can be avoided. So overall, idealism offers a very hopeful view of the world. It tells us that if states are willing to choose peace, cooperate, and follow shared values, then a more peaceful international system is possible.
Okay, let's talk about main argument of idealism. At the core of idealism lies the belief that human nature is inherently good, or at least capable of moral improvement. Unlike realism, which emphasizes conflict and self-interest, idealism holds a more optimistic view. It suggests that war is not inevitable. Instead, peace can be achieved through diplomacy, international law, and collective governance. Okay, let's talk about key elements of idealism. There are 4 elements that define idealism. Firstly is human nature. Idealists believe that humans and by extension states are capable of cooperation and ethical behavior. Secondly is international institution. Organizations like the League of Nations and the United Nations are essential in regulating state behavior and promoting global peace. Thirdly is cooperations. Idealism emphasizes the state should resolve conflict through negotiate, disarmament, and legal framework. Fourthly is norm as morality. Idealists stress the importance of moral value in shaping international conduct such as justice, human rights, and humanitarian principles. What is characteristic of idealism? Idealism is characterized by, firstly is optimism about peace and process in global affairs. Secondly, a strong focus on law, ethics, and diplomacy over military power. The belief in collective security, where an attack one is considered an attack on all. Support for humanitarian intervention under principles like responsibility to protect or R2P, when states fail to protect their own citizens.
Today, I will talk about the key impacts of idealisms in international relations and how this philosophy has influenced the way countries interact on the global stage. First, let's begin with the promotion of global peace. Idealisms believe that conflict is not a natural or necessary part of international politics. Instead, it encourages diplomacy, dialogue, and peaceful conflict resolution. For example, rather than resorting to war, idealism promotes negotiations, peace talks, and international mediation to resolve disputes. Second, we have the formation of international institutions. After World War II, idealist principles led to the creation of the organizations like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and the International Criminal Court. These institutions help maintain global cooperation, promote health and security, and ensure that crimes like genocides or war crimes are brought to justice. Third is human rights advocacy. Idealism strongly supports the protection of human dignity and freedom. This belief helps shapes the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and many others global treaties. Countries today are expected to respect these rights, and violations are often challenged by the international community. Fourth, idealism support multilateralism, which means together through alliances and agreements instead of acting alone. Countries cooperate through treaties like the Paris Climate Agreements to fight climate change or the Geneva Convention, which set rules during war to protect civilians and prisoners. Finally, idealism promotes aid and development. It encourages wealthier nations and international organizations to support poor or crisis-affected countries through humanitarian aid, education, and sustainable development. For example, the United Nations Development Programme and the World Food Programme help millions of people globally. Idealism has had a powerful influence on how nations relate to each other. It has encouraged a more peaceful, just, and cooperative international system. Thank you. Today, I'd like to discuss some of the key lessons we have learned from idealisms in international relations. Idealism is the belief that international politics should be guided by morality. ethics, cooperation, and shared global values, rather than just power or self-interest. One of the core lessons idealism is that foreign policy should reflect moral values. For example, countries that support democracy and human rights at home are encouraged to promote those same values abroad. This had led to international efforts to end apartheid, support democratic movement, and advocate for women's and children's rights. Countries are expected to be consistent between their internal values and their global action. Then idealisms have established important organizations like the United Nations, World Health Organizations, and the International Criminal Court. These institutions will build on the belief that collective action can maintain peace and solve global issues like health, crises, or human rights violations. Global cooperation through international institutions can be powerful and effective. Next, the limits of idealism alone. However, history also shows us that idealism cannot work alone. For example, the League of Nations. Its created after World War I was based on the idealist principle, but it failed to prevent World War II because it lacked enforcement power and global support. Idealism must be supported by practical strategies and political will to succeed. Other than that, the need for balance with realism. Another major lesson is that idealism and realism must work together. This is because idealism brings moral purpose, while realisms bring practical awareness of power, security, and national interest. When combined, they create a balanced foreign policy, one that strives for peace but is prepared for challenges. A successful international strategy often blends both ethical goals and realistic assessment. Idealism has taught us valuable lessons, the importance of moral leaderships, the power of international cooperation, and the need to balance hope with realism. While idealism alone may not solve all global problems, it provides the ethical vision that drives progress, peace, and justice in the international community. That's all from me. Thank you.
I'll continue this presentation with the advantages and disadvantages of idealism. For the first advantage, we have promotions of peace and morality. Idealism stresses the importance of morality in politics. It encourages nations to act ethically, promoting peace rather than conflict. Idealists believe that moral educations and the internalizations of ethical norms among leaders and citizens can prevent war. For the second advantage, we have encouraged international cooperations. One of idealism's greatest contribution is its support for international corporations. Idealists play a key role in the creation of institutions like League of Nations and later United Nations. These organizations aim to foster dialogue, resolve disputes peacefully, and enforce international law. For the third advantage is radical change for a better world. Idealists believe that the world can and should be radically improved. They support both reform to address global inequality, injustice, and conflict. This could mean advocating for disarmament, global economic justice, or the protection of environment. The fourth one, we have focused on human progress. Idealism has an optimistic view of human nature and potential. It believes that through education, diplomacy, and international engagement, society can evolve to become more and just peacefully. This belief fuels long-term efforts toward global harmony. And the last advantage is moral justification for intervention.
Idealism provides a framework for morally justified intervention. For example, stepping in to stop genocide or to protect human rights isn't just a political act, it is a moral duty. This inspired humanitarian missions around the world. Moving on to the next part. Despite its range, idealism has been widely criticized, especially by the realist thinker, who argue that it underestimates the harsh reality of international politics. For the first disadvantages is overly optimistic and unrealistic. Idealism can be criticized for assuming that all states and leaders will prioritize morality over self-interest. In reality, many nations act out of national interest, not ethical duty. This idealistic outlook can make the theory seem disconnected from the practical geopolitics. The second, we have underestimate power struggle. Idealism tends to downplay the importance of power and economic competitions. Many global conflicts are driven by the struggles of resources, influence, or territory. Issues that can always be solved through dialogues and ethics alone. For the third one, we have conflicts with the reality of anarchy. The international system is often described as anarchy, meaning there is no central authority above sovereign states. Idealism assumes cooperation is natural, but without enforcement mechanism, moral agreements are often ignored or broken. Next, for the fourth, we have potential for ineffectiveness. When other states refuse to act morally, idealism can fall short. For example, if nations refuse to stop human rights abuse but also reject international pressure, idealist approach may fail to bring the real change or accountability. For the last disadvantages is risk of being exploited. Finally, idealism can be naively exploited. Some states may pretend to support moral causes like democracy or peace while secretly pursuing self-serving goals. This undermines global trust and make idealist policy appear weak and hypocritical.